Today we're going to have a look at planting beans. It's a little bit early to actually plant them out, but the forecast is quite mild at night times for the next few weeks, and some of my beans are ready to go out. I've made this structure very similar method to the one I made for the peas earlier. I've cheated a little bit because I've tied some bits together with string, but it's a bit taller because I'm growing climbing beans. I prefer to grow climbing beans rather than dwarf beans because dwarf beans hang on the floor and they're very susceptible to slugs and snails. And I've always suffered from that in all my sort of gardens. But I prefer French beans rather than runner beans. And I used to work with the Heritage Seed Library, and during the time that I was a seed guardian for them, I managed to build up quite a big collection of beans, and I'm really interested in the different varieties. Been a long-term vegetarian. Legumes make up quite a large part of my diet and protein, and there are so many different varieties, from the little slim haricot beans that you can see there, they're all different colours, to the rounder beans which we call cocoa beans. You often use them for shelling, but you can use them in their pods whilst they're very young, to the larger borlotti types, which you would shell at the end of the season and dry them for winter use. And I've got all different varieties. The heirloom beans are what we call open pollinated. They're not commercial varieties. They've been grown often by individuals in a very small location or geographic location, and they save seeds every year in the old-fashioned way to develop their strain of beans into saving the tastiest ones every year. Some of them get a bit stringy. They're not stringless, all of them, but you just pull off that or harvest them when they're really young. And here I've got 3 different types, actually 4. There is a Spanish bean that I bought from a Spanish market last year. I've not grown that before, but I'm interested to see how it does. Greasy is actually an 1800s American variety. They're not actually greasy, they just have shiny pods. Roy's butterbean is a lovely flat podded bean, and it's really nice as a haricot vert when it's young. And but you can save the beans as butter beans. And blue cocoa has beautiful purple flowers and dark purple pods. So I've got more ready to come out in a week or two, but I like to grow a whole range of different varieties for different reasons. I grew them in modules, and if you watched the seed sowing video, you'll have seen me sowing some of the blue cocoa beans, and now they're ready to plant out. They've been hardened off in a shade tunnel, and I'm making the hole slightly deeper because they're a tiny bit leggy, and I can plant them just slightly deeper so that they don't flop over so much. And this is the ideal stage when they're starting to develop a pair of true leaves on the plant. I plant 1 per cane, and those floppy leaves there by that cane, they're some extra hazel I had to cut because I didn't have quite enough for the structure. So they're not beans. But if you're worried about the frost, or maybe there's a period of wet weather ahead and the slugs and snails love beans, you can actually sow a seed next to the plant that you've just planted in case of disaster on the early crop. That seed will germinate in the next few weeks and replace it if necessary. If both germinate, you can either, or if both are successful, you can either leave 2 plants per cane, or you can take out the weakest one. It's usually advisable just to grow 1 per cane because they get quite tangled, but I have spaced mine quite far apart here. So open pollinated varieties also means that you can save the seed because they're not hybrids. They're not modern commercial hybrids that are grown mainly for harvesting all in one go. They're developed for shelf life rather than flavor, and this is one of the reasons I prefer the open pollinated varieties, and I can save my own seed, and it saves money from year to year as well. I'm just doing something really important here. I'm taking my footprints out. You could do this with a rake or a fork, but I have a few weed seedlings that had just germinated as well, so I did 2 jobs in one go. Here I'm just showing you I've been growing some chickpeas as well. I actually sowed 2 seeds per module, but both have germinated, so I'm going to separate these little root systems out and plant them individually. Chickpeas don't climb, so they're going to go in a double short row, and they make sort of quite stocky, bushy plants. These are some giant Spanish garbanzo beans that I bought dried in a packet when I was in Spain last year, and they are I would never harvest them as a dried chickpea. That you only get 2 per pod, and it's a fiddly process, and dried chickpeas are so cheap to buy. However, as a green pea, they're super tasty and a completely different thing altogether. So I feel that it's worth it just for a few small batches. A word about watering in. You can see here I'm puddling these plants in when they've been planted, and I will only really water them again if we have a sustained dry spell. The main thing is that you water direct to the roots and you water deep down, and that encourages the roots downwards. If you lightly sprinkle the plants every day, all you'll get is the roots forming at the surface, and as soon as that dries out, then they'll die. And the other thing is, if you sprinkle it all over the foliage, particularly on an evening, and that those wet water droplets stay on the leaves, you're encouraging diseases like mildew. So try to water less frequently and more deeply.